today Chapter 3, which is discussing and defining the research problem. We have some learning outcomes in our lecture and certain learning objectives we want to reach. First of all, we want to identify and define the problem clearly. Second, we want to identify the nature of the research inquiry. Then, how to formulate the research objectives. And finally, how to determine the units of analysis required. The importance of problem definition. What is the research problem and what is the definition of the research problem? It is a statement about the area of concern or a condition to be improved or a troubling question that exists in the literature or even in theory. Why do we have to identify or define this problem? And it is very important step. Because simply, if you are stating the general problem and identifying the specific components of the research, you can then answer this question. Only when the research problem is clearly defined, so the research can be designed and conducted properly. So, defining the problem clarifies what information is needed to communicate to the decision maker. We have a general rule in defining the research problem. This definition should allow the researcher to obtain all the information needed to address the business problem and guide the researcher in proceeding with this project. So, defining the problem can be a little bit tricky because it has to justify these two important or golden rules. There are some key steps in defining the research problem. First of all, the decision maker problem should be identified in particular. It could be an area of concern, a condition to be improved, a difficulty to be eliminated, or even a troubling question that exists in a scholarly literature, in theory, or even in practice. Second, the information needed to address this problem should be clearly identified. So the research problem should be defined and refined, and the information needed to address this problem should be determined. Third step, the type of research inquiry needed for this research problem. In our previous lecture, we have explained many research inquiries like the explanatory research, the exploratory research, or the causal research. Also, the research objectives and goals should be set. And the final question, how will the researcher findings be used? In what area, in which context, and in which environment? Another important question that should be answered regarding the definition of the problem is who is involved in this process. Defining the problem and the research problem and getting to specific research objectives requires discussion with the owner of the problem. The owner of the problem is responsible for an individual problem, and he oversees the handling of the problem, bringing in analysts and specialists as needed to handle this problem. So the problem owner is responsible for seeing the analysts and specialists bring the problem to close. Or even he could be the internal researcher of the organization. Anyway, who is involved in the problem definition could be categorized as, in the early stages, could be the owner of the problem or the internal, the client-side researcher, or in later stages, he could be the internal researcher or the external researcher. There are two kinds of problems, business problem and research problem. So what is the difference between them both? The research problem represents something unknown in the field of study, an inconclusive concern or unresolved issue in the research. This gap of understanding is a problem for research on the topic. So, dissertation studies are designed to collect information to better understand the topic in question, thereby contributing to the field of study, which may also involve implications for practitioners. That's why research problems asks what information is needed and how it should be obtained, and allow the researcher to obtain all information needed to address the management decision problems and guide the researcher in proceeding with the project in a dissertation or a regular research. So research problem is information oriented and focusing on underlying causes. On the other side, the business problem is a supportable, identifiable problem in the business community. Business problem might include declining profit or high rates of employee turnover. The business problems must be supported by literature or by statistics and involve collecting information to solve the identifiable business problems. So, a business study must proceed from a business problem. They ask what the decision maker needs and it is action oriented. That's why they focuses on symptoms rather than causes. One of the very important steps when defining the problem is to know what type of research inquiry needed. Once research problem defined, we have to ask, what sort of research inquiry is it? If you remember the types of research inquiries, exploratory, descriptive, explanatory. Why asking about the research inquiry? Because it helps to clarify the research objectives and what sort of research needed, what is it, and what type of research design. Now moving to the research objectives. Research objectives assist in guiding, first, the information needs, what the research aims to find out, and the question the research will answer. We have some examples of research objectives. For example, this research asks about what factors are involved in the decision to start a pension. Another example, a research asks about what features of the product have greatest appeal to the target market. So here, in defining research objectives, we ask the question exactly the researcher wants to answer and what the research aims to find out. And the setting of the research objective depends on the nature of the inquiry. If the inquiry is descriptive, is exploratory, or it's causal, the research objective also will follow if they are exploratory objectives, descriptive or contextual, explanatory or diagnostic. When defining the research problem, the exploratory research is most appropriate. Why? Because if you remember, when we talked last lecture about exploratory research, we mentioned that exploratory research is used when we need some insight about a certain phenomena, or when the subject of a study in hand we cannot study in quantitative manner. So exploratory research here is used and favorable to provide insight into an understanding of the marketing phenomena. We use it where the process of measurement is not clear. For example here, if a researcher was trying to understand what atmosphere meant in a restaurant, exploratory research may help to establish all the appropriate variables and how they connected together. What role did music play? What type of music? How loud? All these questions are descriptive and exploratory in nature. This list could go on of what atmosphere may mean in the context of the restaurant experience. That's why exploratory research may be used in cases when you must define the problem more precisely and identify relevant courses of actions or gain additional insight before going on to confirm findings using a conclusive design. In the search of information, you have to take into consideration that the time and money for the research is limited. Regardless of how big you have the budget for the research, it is also still limited. So you have to put priorities for the information you need for your research. It is called prioritizing information needs. So the researcher should ask himself, what is the focus of the research in particular? If the researcher is making the research too broad, so he is risking the waste of resources. And if he is doing it too narrow, he is risking about failing to address the problem or answer the question. The researcher should identify and distinguish very well between what is nice to know and what is really needed to know to answer the question and address the research problem. Regarding the unit of analysis, the researcher should think ahead how he is going to end use of data, like how is he going to analyze it and how he will answer the research question. He should ask really about the respondents or how he will reach the target population. This will affect his sampling unit. These sampling units could be universities, parents, families, individual consumers. These are the correspondents who will answer his questions and end up with answering or identifying the answer for his research problem. For example, from whom or what do you get your data when you ask about the choice of your brand, of your phone brand? For example, who's your target population? This is very important to define the units of analysis. Also, the time dimension is of crucial importance. The time dimension is very important in deciding when exactly to do the research and over what period to collect data. Also, time dimensions have implication on the choice of research design. So whether it is to take a snapshot at one point of time or take a view over a long period of time. Examples for this difference in time dimension. For example, if you have a research on launching a new product, it could be a snapshot at one point of time. Attitudes to change in policy, also a snapshot at one point of time. However, if the research is monitoring an ad campaign, it could be a view over a longer period of time. In conclusion, defining the research problem is a very important stage in the research process. It requires a deep understanding of the nature of the research inquiry, whether it is exploratory, explanatory, or causal research, and also to set the information needed to set the research objectives. The units of analysis are very important. Whom to ask, who are the respondents, who are the target population, and also the time dimension, whether it is a specific point of time or a range over a period of time. Investing in research, the decisions from research revalue of findings to business. Some company invest in research to remain competitive and to stay ahead in the market. By reaching this summary, we have come to the end of our lecture. I'm looking forward to see you in a new lecture. Thank you and